Welcome to New York Got Game.
Welcome back to another edition of New York Got Game. A lot going on with the Knickerbockers. We are under 3 weeks away from the trade deadline. So this was a week we could talk about everything that went on in the past couple of games with the Knicks against the Timberwolves and Julius Randle's return to Madison Square Garden, Trae Young coming back to MSG on Martin Luther King Day. But this week, I really wanted to talk about and take time to start keeping an eye towards the trade deadline as we're under 3 weeks away from there and look at what this team could do to improve themselves. So we're not going to get into what happened into the recent games. We're kind of going to look ahead this week. Take a little bit of time to look ahead because then we have some big matchups coming up towards the end of the month. Got a special guest joining me to talk about trades. I'll consider him a trade guru. It's a good one. We're going to have some fun talking about some trades, making some trades. So let's get right to it. Well, it is indeed trade season and a lot to talk about around the New York Knickerbockers. We are just under 3 weeks away from the trade deadline, and there's been so much talk about how the Knicks could add depth to the roster. Can they even do that? Who should they trade? Who could they get? There's a lot of questions, folks. And so what I wanted to do on this episode was take some time with a great guest to talk about what the Knicks can do and also try to come up with some realistic, keyword being realistic trades that the Knicks could actually make at the deadline this year. Joining me to talk about that is a contributor to Knicks Film School. He hosts Cap or No Cap. I want to make sure I get that right. He does that with Jonathan Macri on Knicks Film School. You see him every week on Knicks Film School podcast. It's my guy, Jeremy Cohen, who joins me now. Jeremy, what's going on?
Hey, Dexter, great to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, man, I'm so glad to have you here. I feel like you were the perfect person to have here because I knew that you will not bring me any crazy trades. I know the trades are going to be realistic. I know they're going to be grounded in nuance. I know all of that. I want to let the people know you're somebody who you love this. You love the nuance of the cap, all the transactions. What about it do you love? Because you're very passionate about this. And I love that. But what about it is it that you love so much about it?
It's one big logic puzzle. It's all these moving pieces. It's understanding what can fit where and how much time is on your side and all of the logistics that go into what's our goal, how do we work around that. I think it's a blast. It's crazy that so much of a player's talent and their financial component to it comes so intertwined. But I love the fact that every single year there are new challenges that you get to figure out and try to sort through them as the year goes on to build the best team that you can.
Yeah, team building is not easy. I think sometimes that gets taken for granted in salary cap sports. Team building is not easy at all. But let's talk about the Knicks and what they should do before the deadline. What should the Knicks do, or can they do, to improve their roster? Because that's also part of the question, Jeremy. But what should they do? If you're looking at this roster, what do you think they need to improve? Or how should they try to go about improving this roster before the trade deadline?
Number of different ways, and I think there are a lot of ways that they could go, which would be great. Ideally, the Knicks are able to find someone who can plug in a little bit more hedge at the wing, more defensive-minded. But that player, it's really hard to get that player. The Knicks don't have a ton of assets at their disposal. And of course, when you talk about the salary component, not a lot of financial things that work out in the way they want. So the question that I keep going back to is, I know that the Knicks have, when healthy, an incredible starting five. Really talented offensive end. You hope the defense certainly comes together a bit more. When Mitchell Robinson comes back, assuming he's healthy, able to add another person. And you've got Deuce McBride. And that right there, 7 players that the Knicks can trust, health being certainly something that would need to come into the picture too. But those are 7 players on paper come playoff time that I would trust. And the question that I keep going back to, who's the 8th guy that you can bring in? Who's someone who, when you go into the playoffs, you're not focused on an 82 game player. You're focused on someone who you feel can take the load off of other players, who can be someone who's healthy as well, enough to get you down the home stretch so that you go into the playoffs feeling rested, but not someone who also makes your team feel like they're missing a beat when a star player might not be playing games. So the Knicks being able to add talent, period. Would it be great if they were a strong defender? Absolutely. But as far as I see it, if it's someone who can hit threes, who can be efficient, who can perhaps dribble a little bit as well, those are all great selling points to me.
And that leads me to the thought about the type of player, as you mentioned there, because there's some school of thought that some will say, okay, the Knicks need to get another big. They need to add some more rim protection in the effect that Mitchell Robinson can't come back and be healthy and help them in that role. Some people will say a wing would be nice. Somebody also that could add some shot creation, something you talked about there. Do you have a preference as to the type of player that you think the Knicks should add here if they could at the deadline?
Might be in the minority here, but I feel like a lead ball handler would be an ideal option for
Mm,
the Knicks. The way I see it is they're trading from a bit of a strength if they choose to go down this route of centers. The Knicks have 5 centers on their roster right now. That's a
right.
lot. They typically don't have 5. They, in the years past, have had 3, maybe 4. And then when you look at the players that the Knicks have, well, uh, it's certainly not Karl Anthony Towns going anywhere. RL Huckporty, his salary is too small to really do anything. And Mitchell Robinson, of course, could move him. But the question then is, are you getting a player who can match what Mitchell Robinson gives you? Of course, caveat, when he's healthy. Then you look at the salaries of guys like Precious Achua and Jericho Sims, and the players you'd find not going to be a ton of them. So it's really difficult to figure out which of those centers you'd be able to package for which player, for how much it costs, and also abiding by the strict rules that the new CBA has on the Knicks because they're hard capped at the second apron. So
And
a lot going on there.
that's the thing there, right? And I look, every time I have Stefan Bondi on, we do videos together. He always tells me, Dex, you know how much I love talking about the apron, and he's being extremely sarcastic because nobody really loves talking about these aprons here. With that being said, Jeremy, do you think with the apron restrictions and Knicks being right below the second apron, do you think it's likely that they make a deal here at the deadline?
I do. The Knicks in the years past have done a great job of taking players that are perhaps at the end of the rotation and packaging them with little goodies that can get them one level up. They did it, of course, when they had Cam Reddish. They traded Kevin Knox and a first round pick and were able to get Cam Reddish. And then when that didn't work out, they used Cam Reddish and other salary and a first round pick to get Josh Hart. And we know how that certainly turned out too. So the question for the Knicks is, can they take from their strength? Can they take from the back end of their depth as well and put any sort of assets together, cobble them, have quantity converted into quality, and have that be a player that really gets them from we're doing well, we feel we should be a contender to make no mistake about it. This should be a team that has the ability to go very far.
Yeah, and that's what fans I know want to see. Before we move on, because we're going to go through some what we think could be realistic trades, some trades that have been put out there in the media, and I also asked Jeremy to come up with some trades. But before we get to that, Jeremy, I would like, if possible, could you explain to people, because I know the apron talk is so fun. I understand all that. Why is making a trade so difficult for the Knicks right now with them being a couple $100,000 below the second apron?
Sure. Well, listen, I also get it for those who are a little skittish about this stuff, but they're funeral directors and undertakers too. So you gotta find some way to help out with this. But the Knicks are essentially stuck at the second apron due to, you can go back in time for what it is. The Knicks aggregated players together to get Mikal Bridges. The moment they did that, they were hard capped to the second apron. What that means is really they can't be hard capped at the first apron and they can't go above the second apron. Right now, they're at $535,000 below the second apron. That's not enough to sign anyone to a end of season deal, whether it's a buyout candidate or some sort of free agent who's on the market. Can't do that. They can't take back more money than they send out. So if they were to send out $5 million, they'd have to take under $5 million. They can't even take $5,001. They also can't use a traded player exception that was acquired before. Of course, for example, they have a Malachi Flynn traded player exception. Not able to use that. If they used it because it's from the season before, that would hard cap them at the first apron. That's a big no-no. And lastly, the Knicks can't use their taxpayer mid-level exception as part of a trade or the biannual exception. Either one of those, well, the taxpayer mid-level exception is only for signing. The non-taxpayer mid-level, which the Knicks did not have access to, that could be used to acquire a player via trade. But so the Knicks can only use that as a signing maneuver. And then for the biannual exception, it's also only for signing a free agent. Of course, they can't use that one either. So it's really just a matter of what you see on the roster. That's what you're going to get, or you're able to move them for some sort of piece with less money coming in.
And folks, we appreciate Jeremy for that breakdown, and I understand that none of that is fun.
No.
I understand that it only clears up the limitations that the Knicks have here, but this is the world the Knicks are in, and we're going to see if we can come up with some deals that are real for them. Okay, so Jeremy has given me 3 deals that he has, and I'm going to hold those for the end. But I want to talk to you about some deals I've seen other places. Some other people have floated around. This one is Mitchell Robinson to Chicago for Javon Carter, Torrey Craig, Greg Duarte, and a 2nd-round pick. I believe Jeff Maggioletti from Sports Illustrated had proposed this out here. I saw that. What do you make of this deal? Realistic? Does this work for the Knicks? What do you think of this one?
Sure. Let's start with the CBA component of it, right?
Yes.
This trade works financially. The problem here is that the Knicks have 1 open roster spot, and this trade would have them taking 2 players. So they'd need to either send another player out for the math to work. They can't send out Landry Shamet. He's not eligible to be traded this season. They'd have to find some sort of smaller salary. So then it's a question of, well, who are they moving? Is it Huck Porty? Is it Kolek? Is it Payne? Is it Dadier? It'd have to be one of those guys just to clear a roster spot. Or do they waive a player and then make this deal happen? That seems even less likelier. In terms of if that were not an issue, where you make it a 3-team deal, one of those players goes into an open roster spot. Does moving Mitchell Robinson for any of them help the Knicks? And to that, I'm not so certain it does. Mitchell Robinson, we know there are questions about his availability and his health, but you're trading quality for quantity as far as I see it. And those are players who they help in terms of maybe getting you, it's like kind of acquiring a relief arm in before the deadline in baseball, but it doesn't really get you to where you need to go, especially when your ceiling is as high as it realistically feels like it could be. So I'm not the biggest fan of that, but there are workarounds to make it happen.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that because I hadn't even looked into it that deeply, but I thought the same thing. I said, okay, they're going to have to waive somebody here or find a space for that open roster spot. I'm also not convinced, like you are, that the players coming back necessarily help exactly what the Knicks need and some of the things that we talked about at the top here. So this trade for me is a no because I don't think you're getting the best value back from Mitchell Robinson. Now, there's something to be said that where Mitchell Robinson is right now in terms of his trade value, because we haven't seen him play and all of that. I don't know what the trade value is for Mitchell Robinson right now, and I think the Knicks are trying to figure that out, but we'll see what happens with that. Okay, another center on the roster involved in another trade, and this one I've seen thrown about a bit too. This will be sort of a reunion here. Jericho Sims and a future 2nd-round pick to the Miami Heat for Alec Burks. Are you here to bring Burks back? I talked to your boy J-Mac about this the other day, and he's, right up there in the Burks hive along with CP the franchise. They love Alec Burks. Would you be amenable to bringing Burks back for Jericho Sims in a future 2nd-round pick?
Absolutely would. This is someone who has familiarity in the system, would be the 3rd time being on the Knicks. That sort of reunion at least would help the Knicks. Of course, the spot-up shooting is great. His defense has been pretty strong this year. Grades out very nicely with defensive EPM to capture what he can do on that end. Having someone who can spot up, doesn't drive a whole lot, really more of an off-ball guard, but he would help with the minutes, of course, because we know that it's someone that can be trusted. The only factor here is the Knicks have done a really nice job of identifying players who are on the younger side, whose primes are ahead of them as opposed to perhaps behind them. So if you wanted to find someone who could soak up minutes, probably won't excel in the playoffs, but we saw what he was able to do when a couple players went down last year. Definitely an option. Is it my preferred one necessarily? Probably not, but I've even advocated for it on the Knicks Film School podcast, so would not be against it. The real question, of course, we've seen the Knicks make a trade with the Raptors despite a pending lawsuit. We've seen the Knicks make a trade with the Nets when they hadn't traded with each other since 1983. So the question, of course, Dexter, are the Knicks and the Miami Heat making the first trade since 1995 when the Knicks sent Pat Riley to South Beach? That's the one thing that I just have trouble seeing happen.
Yeah, still a lot of bad blood there. That's all I'm going to say. A lot of the Knicks fans know this. The feelings still are not great about that. Yeah, 1995, a long time ago, since they made a transaction. Although, it can help both teams.
Could.
I could see that. I
Does
do
Pat
find
Riley say yes to that then if it helps the Knicks? That's the question I'm asking myself.
probably not. And maybe the better question is, it makes me think. I mean, I think Pat Riley does his due diligence and is going to pick up the phone. But does he pick up the phone? I don't know. I'm not necessarily so sure what he does here. Again, I'm kind of with you on this. Alec Burks, I think you made a great point about the fact of when players went down, and you saw what he did at the end of the Indiana series last year in the conference semifinals. He played really well. He did some things with the ball in his hands. He can create. He was not great during the regular season for the Knicks after they traded for him from Detroit, but he did play all right in the playoffs. And could he help this Knicks team? Yeah, I would say I do have a little bit of concern too, and we'll get into this with another trade where the Knicks, as you said, they tend to identify players in their prime on the younger side. He doesn't necessarily fit on that end of things. You got to remember, on this team, Cam Payne is the oldest player on the team right now. So the Knicks have been really good at keeping players in their prime. Okay, this was one that came from The Athletic I saw, and it's a player that I find interesting. In Simone Fontecchio. I liked some of his skill set when he was with the Jazz before he then got traded to the Pistons, obviously with the Pistons. But this is a three-way deal, and these deals are probably going to be more common for a team like the Knicks, who are just under that second apron, right? So this trade has Simone Fontecchio, the Knicks receiving him. The Pistons will get Bruce Brown from the Raptors and Cameron Payne from the Knicks, and the Raptors will get Precious Achiuwa going back north of the border. The 3 future second-round picks, with 1 from New York and 2 from Detroit. Your thoughts on this trade and Simone Fontecchio, who's got some offensive skill set, but not a great defender? How do you see him fitting in if this trade were to go down for the Knicks?
I like the creativity involved here. A few things, though, that come to mind. First off, well, what would you be getting in Fontecchio? Yes, exactly. You get someone who can add a little bit more size, some shooting as well, did some nice work with the Jazz, had a good year with the Pistons. The real question that comes into play for me, though, is whose minutes is he taking? Because he could be taking from OG Anunoby, could be taking from Mikal Bridges. Sure, that works out fine. But then what are you giving up? So in order to satisfy the conditions of this trade for the math to work, you're removing Precious Achiuwa, you're removing Cameron Payne, and then you're removing a second-round pick. The second-round pick, of course, it's a little bit more manageable. That's something that's fine. But then in terms of backup, you're shoring up your forward spot. But at the center position, if Mitchell Robinson gets hurt, then you're looking at Jericho Sims minutes. And that might be something that's a bridge too far for the Knicks. Similar on the other end with the point guard position. Cameron Payne, he's done a nice job as of late. Of course, he was somewhat in Tibbs's doghouse for a minute. But if you remove him, who's stepping up in his place to play backup minutes? As of this point, seems like Tyler Kolek has not gotten the trust that Tom Thibodeau has for a team that wants to win. He's getting minutes in the G League. There is development certainly happening, and it happens behind the scenes as well. But for a Knicks fan, being able to see it at MSG, not something that's been the case. So is Tibbs going to be comfortable taking someone like Bridges, who the Iron Man of the NBA is seeing fewer minutes there? Or do you rest OG Anunoby? Both options, but then where does it hurt you? And my big concern is, are you focusing on an area that's good, but then is it bad where you kind of deplete yourselves in other spots where you're in a little precarious spot, maybe more so than you would be based on where you're at right now?
Yeah, I think that is the big question with this trade. I like the idea in that, and you said creativity, and I do think it was that, but that what can you do to try to improve this team if you don't trade Mitchell Robinson? This is if you believe in keeping him and you want that rim protection. Obviously, folks, the fact you need him to stay healthy, but you are taking out 2 key rotation pieces and then asking a Tyler Kolek to come in as the backup point guard. Not saying that he can't do it, but that is a big ask of a rookie in the just past the midway point of the season going to the playoffs. That's a tall order there. So I like the creativity, and I wonder if there are more deals to be had that are smaller with an Achiuwa or a Payne and combining their salaries together. But I do find that interesting. Okay, this next trade I want to talk to you about. This is the one I think that's been put all over the place. It's had Mitchell Robinson at least appear jokingly in his feelings a little bit about it. There's been a lot of talk about Jonas Valanciunas. I don't know how you feel. I like Valanciunas as a player. I'm not sure because of his defensive liabilities that he necessarily helps the Knicks, Jeremy. That's a little bit of my concern here, right? Trade
Incredibly.
this trade can go straight up, right? You can trade Mitchell Robinson for Jonas Valanciunas because Washington can absorb Mitchell Robinson's salary. So
Mhm.
you can do that trade straight up if you wanted to. I mean, maybe Washington wants a pick or something else that could happen. What do you think about the framework of a deal for that? Where it's Mitchell Robinson for Jonas Valanciunas straight up. Maybe the Knicks have to throw in a second round pick. What do you think about that? Are you with me in the same vein with Jonas Valanciunas that you might like some of the things he can do, but concerned about the defense? And he's 32 because I know you watch the age. I know he's 32. What do you think of this deal?
Not my favorite.
Mm,
This to me feels like two or a bird in the hand versus two in the bush. Uh,
mm,
we know what Mitchell Robinson can do in the playoffs. We saw how he was really one of the best, if not the best and most dominant players in that Cavs series. Now, that was 2 years ago. That was before injury as well. Valanciunas, from an offensive perspective, very good rebounder, can hit shots, not a shooter. He has a reputation of being an outside shooter, doesn't really hit shots at a good level. It seems like the sort of thing where just because he has the prowess to perhaps say hit 30% of his threes, that's better than 0% from Mitchell Robinson, but is that the right shot that should be taken? Is that how you want him to thrive? So it's a question of how positionally do you want him to operate? This type of trade as well would save the Knicks about $5 million, would give them space, of course, for buyout options. But then the question is, who is really helping them that fits into that framework of that $5 million? Because I don't see too many players on the buyout market, at least certainly right now, who do exactly what you need. Now, if there were an opportunity to loop in a third team, maybe squeeze another salary into that spot, that's a potential option. I'm more interested if we go down that path. But kind of a one-for-one player swap of Mitch for Valanciunas, it's not my cup of tea.
yeah, I don't like it. I hadn't even mentioned. I'm glad you brought up the $5 million about in savings that they would have. We can add another player. And before we get to your trades, I would like to talk about that because a lot of fans, I'm sure, want to know and are saying, okay, Dex and Jeremy, well, the Knicks could just grab somebody in the buyout market. And you explained before why that is actually not possible. And also, even if you had some of the space, not that easy, because I think people think a lot of times that some fans may think that, okay, get some money in the buyout, but those guys are generally getting bought out for a reason and not necessarily likely to help a playoff roster or help you at playoff time. Is there any players out there? I guess this is my question to you, Jeremy, that you think could help the Knicks if they had some more space and could sign somebody for the rest of the year? Is there anybody? Because I haven't thought about it, but if you have somebody, please let me know.
Put a little bit of thought into it. We'll see what crystallizes over the next few weeks, especially if there's player movement and suddenly a player goes to another team that you wouldn't expect and then they're bought out. There's one issue, of course, which is that the new CBA makes it where any player earning more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception cannot be, if bought out, signed by a team like the Knicks based on their salary situation. So as a result, all of the players who would be earning really solid minutes, if they were to be bought out, it wouldn't be an option. One example, right? Let's say someone like Lonzo Ball were bought out by the Bulls. Don't necessarily see it happening, but let's say it happened. If that were the case, the Knicks would not be able to sign him because he's earning north of $20 million, which is at least $6 million above where the non-taxpayer mid-level exception is. So you have to look at players earning below around $12 million who are bought out who actually help them. We saw last year, really, that Shake Milton, a buyout candidate, didn't do much on the court, barely played. I think he had 6 games played in total, but he was certainly helpful in the Knicks getting the salary to match to get Mikal Bridges. So when you think about the buyout players, they're typically guys who are older who we know the Knicks don't love to acquire, but might if they needed to. So if it's maybe a TJ Warren type, sure. But then the question, of course, to ask yourself is, well, if TJ Warren were that productive, why hasn't he been signed by another team? Because other teams have the ability to just get him for nothing. As things stand right now, if the Knicks didn't clear at least tens, I think it's $12,000 or more, the soonest they could sign a player to an agreement would be March 1st. But until then, barring any other changes, what you see is what you're going to get with the Knicks.
And there we go. The new CBA, some of the restrictions around there that are affecting the Knicks. And so thank you for explaining that, because I know there'll be a lot of talk about the buyout market. I'm sure we'll talk about that too. Okay, let's get to the trades that I asked you, because I asked Jeremy and said, hey, Jeremy, I want you to come to the table with some trades that are realistic, that you think can go down, and I want to talk about them. So I will let everybody know. Every one of the trades that Jeremy sent me involves Jericho Sims. Every one. Sent me 3. They all involve Jericho Sims, which I found interesting, and we'll get to the why of that. But the first one, Jericho Sims and a protected future second, hold on, Knicks fans, to Philadelphia for Kyle Lowry. Now, you know, Knicks fans are not in love with the Sixers, especially even after they beat them in the playoffs last year, Joel Embiid, all of this. But Kyle Lowry, been a good player throughout his career, very tough-nosed player, even at his age. Why do you like this deal? How do you think this one helps the Knicks?
So I think, candidly, it's a slight overpay for a player like Lowry, who, again, hard to say. Well, the Knicks look for players who are earlier in their primes than get someone who's 39 years old here. But it's really just a matter of kind of shifting chairs on the Titanic. If the Titanic didn't hit an iceberg and made it to New York safe and sound, the sort of thing here where you've got a position of depth. It's the center spot. If you needed extra depth at another place and you can't get in the wing, maybe a lead ball handler here could help. Lowry has taken a step back. I think the thing about Sims, of course, is that he adds value with the offensive rebounding and protecting the rim. Would probably have to be more of a 3-team deal. Thinking as well, if there were something to incentivize Philadelphia, maybe it's the Knicks, maybe it's that third team, just to say, hey, Philly, your season's kind of going nowhere. Try to get something you can and move on. And maybe the band that you've got here does something. But as far as it works with Sims, like him as a player, I think he definitely has value. But can you get someone to sort of fill in the other holes that really need to be addressed?
Okay. Kyle Lowry there, 39. Jeremy explained himself, didn't want to sound like he was contradicting himself, talked about the age with the Knicks and looking for players closer to their prime. Kyle Lowry clearly passed his prime, but showed last year in the playoffs, can give you some good minutes, about 12. He really played about 12, 15 most games he was playing, and he was okay. He was solid. Lost a step, but he was okay. Okay. That trade, I'll be honest, I'd probably pass on it. I see the idea of what you're trying to do. And to be clear and fair to Jeremy, this is why Jeremy was struggling to make trades when his first trade involved Kyle Lowry. That shows you how hard it is. This is the point I'm trying to say. It shows you how difficult it is.
Can I tell you the honorable mention one that I decided not to do?
Oh, go ahead. Sure.
Mention one. No, of course. It was thinking if you took Mitchell Robinson and he moved him for Jordan Clarkson. And the reason why I opted not to was just because there are question marks with Mitchell Robinson. Yes, but it was the health component with him from a Utah Jazz standpoint. It was dealing with Danny Ainge and what he's going to extract from you to get that level of player. And it was, can you find someone who is not 32 years old like Clarkson, who can provide more stability, who can assist without hurting you at the 5 and weakening you in that spot. So that's why I decided can't do that one. And of course, it was Jericho Sims times 3, but that's where we're at.
And we'll get to the other two. Now, on that note, I like Jordan Clarkson. His name had been brought up. I talked on our weekly live show with my guy, Brian Fontecchio. His name has been brought up. I see where you were going there. I see the fit. Could you find somebody a little younger than him? Well, that's the challenge. Those guys usually signed, and other teams are not likely to trade them. And the other point you brought up that's really good, you would be dealing with Danny Ainge. And we all know how Danny Ainge operates in these deals. He's going to try to get everything out of you, and that would probably be a problem. See, I see. Jeremy knows. He knows he does. Even he doesn't want to deal with Danny Ainge, and I understand that. This other one you had with Jericho Sims and Pacome Dadier, first round pick from 2024, for Jake LaRavia and a future second round pick. Very interesting deal to me here. In that you'd be getting back a second round pick, and let's not sneeze at the second round picks because they're more valuable than ever in this current climate with the CBA. Jake LaRavia gives you some size. You're giving up on a little bit of the future with Pacome Dadier. Why this deal?
So this is sort of a, hey, can we get someone right now who can help us win games? And believe you can at least get taking from that point of depth and adding someone who helps you out. LaRavia, good shooter, a little bit of a smaller sample size, but able to really excel on the spot up side. Um, Gets you to a point where you do take some of that load off of OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges from a minutes perspective. If you're looking at someone like Dadier, yes, he could absolutely be a consistent player. I like what he has to bring. The real question is, are you using him more as an asset, or are you using him more as a player who can help you win now? And since he's not going to help you win now, doesn't mean you have to trade him, of course. But if you could find someone who does that, that would be ideal. The thing about LaRavia, he had his 4th year team option declined, which means he would hit unrestricted free agency. The benefit here is if the Knicks were to have interest in signing him in the offseason, they'd be limited to 2 years and they'd be hard capped at the second apron because the way they'd acquire him would have to be signing him to the to the taxpayer mid-level exception. But by acquiring him, you get his bird rights, you can spend whatever you want. I don't expect him to break the bank, but signing LaRavia would not hard cap you as a result. So if that's a player that you could see yourself wanting, but you don't want to hard cap yourself, getting him in-house this season and still able to help your team this year when when Sims may not be able to do that. And I'm thinking if you get the 2nd round pick, of course, because you just spent the 25th pick or so, you traded back a little bit, but you got Dadier there too. If you at least get I think it's like a 2030 2nd round pick, who knows what it'll be, but at least who knows what it'll be with Become Dadier. So there's an element of it where, do I think from a long-term perspective, the Knicks are taking a hit here? I absolutely do. But we're not really focusing quite on the long term. We want to see what the short term is. And the short term here is, can the Knicks win an NBA championship?
This one was very interesting to me because of the fact that LaRavia has been having a good season. He had his 4th year option declined because he really hadn't been that productive of a rotation player before the season. This is kind of a breakout year for him in a way for the Grizzlies. But the Grizzlies, as we know, operating as a smaller market team, they are looking at how they can extend the future. This is why I can see how this trade makes sense, very much a lot of sense for both sides here. And the Knicks would get a future second. Like you said, even if they kicked it out all the way to 2030, it's not. I kind of like this deal. I like this one. I think this was a smart deal. I think you were thinking about it from both sides and how it could work. I like this one. I like Dadier, so I will say that when it was before the draft, Chris Persian and we broke down. We both like Dadier. I like Dadier before the Knicks picked him. I think he can be I don't know how good of a player he can be, but I think he's going to be a good NBA player. Memphis also usually finds these guys good. He does a good job of developing these guys. And to some credit, with LaRavia, they've done that too, even though his first couple of years, he didn't really look like an NBA rotation player. So I like this deal. This is one I like.
Pays the bills. It's not glamorous, but keep the lights on.
But here's the thing, Jeremy, and you know this, a lot of Knicks fans, they want the glamour. And I think we're here to tell you the glamour trades, it's not happening this deadline. Like, I don't see it. I just don't, I don't see it.
I'm inclined to agree.
Okay.
We'll see.
Now, your last one, very, very interesting. And you are going down. This is going off the fact that the Knicks, you just talked about the Knicks never making a trade with the Heat. And we just saw them make one with the Nets after quite some time. And you're going back to the well and saying, hey, you know what? The door's been open. This might be able to happen again. So this one, you have Jericho Sims. Again, as I said, Jericho Sims is every trade. And I think this one is going to, the next player I'm going to mention is going to probably annoy a little bit of the fan base because they like him and they don't want to see him go here. Tyler Kolek, plus the Wizards first that the Knicks hold to Brooklyn, to the Nets for Cam Thomas. Now, I find this fascinating because we know what Cam Thomas can do. He's a walking bucket, microwave scorer. Sometimes the shot selection is iffy, but if you have him coming off the bench, not asking him to do as much, could work. He is also looking to get paid, which also I find interesting here too. So I wanted, how are you considering the future financials for him with this and giving up Sims and Kolek, kicking away that Wizards first round pick, which probably will actually not convey to a first round pick. It's not likely to do so. Probably will turn to 2 seconds. Why do you like this? Why do you believe the Nets will do this? There's a lot of questions I have here for this. Why do you think all that will happen? You're going to the well again, Mr. Cohen. Explain it to me.
Sure. I'll give you the best answers that I think I've got. So Then let's start with the Nets, right? There's a very real possibility they have no interest in trading Cam Thomas. He's a very
Right.
good player. I think he's probably suited best in a bench role, to your point. But the Nets, they've got their eyes on a larger picture here. The Nets have their eyes on how can they get the top pick in the NBA draft. We've already seen most recently they won a pivotal game against the Blazers that put the Blazers in a better standing, of course, for the lottery odds than the Nets have had. Nets have a lot of talent on their roster, and they've got a lot of cap space this summer. So they can keep Cam Thomas. They could rest him as best they can. They could get away with whatever it is that they want. We know that they like him. I think that that's a completely valid thing. And the question, of course, is why would he go to the Knicks? Does he have to go to the Knicks? Well, would he go to other teams? Very possible that he does. If I'm the Nets, though, and I see this as a multi-year rebuild, there's a world here where Cam Thomas's peak value is right now because of his price point, because he's only earning $4 million and he's set up to get exactly a large contract. So if a team like the Knicks comes knocking, and you think about any other teams that might have similar offers, it's very possible that they do. It's possible they have larger offers. But the Nets, of course, when it comes to teams in the pecking order or these players, they're going to look at moving Cameron Johnson instead, or at least first. They might look at Nick Claxton. They might look at across their entire roster, and Cam Thomas might not be an option there. But then you think about it from the Knicks perspective. Okay, well, the trades that usually get done for a younger player or just a good player, it's usually a young asset, a pick, and the necessary salary filler. And it's Tyler Kolek as the young asset. It's that pick, which, as you mentioned, Dexter, likely to be 2 high second round picks as opposed to a first round pick. But we've seen the value of those picks skyrocket because now there's the rookie exception. You can get team control for cheaper. And in some ways, I would argue that the 31st pick has more value than the 30th pick because the 30th pick, you've got this rookie scale that you have to kind of abide by for the most part. And that second round exception is a lot cheaper. So for teams that want to be frugal, it's a good asset to have. Now, the thing that I've kept going back to when it comes to Tyler Kolek, we know how close the Knicks are margin-wise to the second apron. And what did they do with Pacome Dadier? Well, they got Pacome Dadier and they said, Pacome, we're going to draft you, but we need you to take a contract that's less than the standard amount. And he took about 80% of that, if memory serves. But for
Correct.
Tyler Kolek, they gave Tyler Kolek the largest contract any rookie has ever received in the second round. They brought him up to the exact same number as a veteran cap hit that someone like, Cameron Payne would be making. And so the question goes, why would the Knicks, when they're so money conscious, give out money to a player taken later than Pacome Dadier? And that to me has felt like that's how you bridge the gap. When you add the salary of 2 minimum players, which the Knicks can now do because we passed December 15th, you can't stack minimums in the offseason. The Knicks now, between Jericho Sims and Tyler Kolek, have just enough money to get someone like Cam Thomas. And it would be the same thing that we talked about before, which is taking from your depth, taking young talent as well, taking a future asset and converting it. Now, you also mentioned Cam Thomas. He's going to get paid, right? I expect him to command upwards of 18, maybe even $20 million. And when you look at the Knicks, they're very close to the second round apron moving forward. That's going to be with all of their starting five, with Mitchell Robinson. That's going to be a big thing to monitor moving forward. So there are a few things at play this summer because you have to be forward thinking for all these things. The Knicks, they could keep him. They could keep Cam Thomas, and they're a second apron team. And then the year after that, they do some cost cutting and figure it out. That's one option. Second option, they bring back Cam Thomas, and then they try to trade his salary for a salary that's less than that next year to cut the tax bill a bit, but they're still above the second apron. That's a problem. Or the third is that they get Cam Thomas. They say, this is a player who can help us win right now. We are willing to part with assets to get him. But the question is, why? What do we do with him? And how do we make it work? And then there's the whole process of the sign and trade. The sign and trade, if they sign and trade Cam Thomas away in the offseason, that would once again hard cap the Knicks at the second apron. They could be fine with that. But then you're able to take some salary back. It's not like you're just moving him for nothing. Maybe there's a rotation player that you can get back by using the sign and trade and still be under the second apron. So It's a short-term play with long-term intentions where you're still able to have your cake and eat it too. And if all it takes is players that are getting, on average, when everyone's healthy, 0 minutes, but still have some talent there, and the ability to add some draft equity to get you a player that you feel can benefit you from day one, can take some of the pressure off of Jalen Brunson, who's a really good pull-up shooter, who can play on the catch and shoot, who can drive, who gets fouls called at an incredible level, doesn't help the defense, and I know that's going to be a concern for people.
Right.
But what's the priority here? To me, it's making sure that the players that the Knicks have are well rested. And I see the Knicks in a lot of ways winding up more like that Denver Nuggets team that won the championship, where in the regular season, elite offense, defense, pretty average. But then you get to the playoffs, it's 0-0 for everyone else. You can start fresh, and you're able to execute your offense and have things come together with the defense and play a little bit more tight defense that way. So I understand that for some, this trade may not feel realistic at all. I even have my hesitations. But in terms of how the Knicks have operated and what they can do to go from where they're at to one step higher, I would love for them to do this.
I think when I first looked at the trade, I was like, nah. That was my first reaction, right?
Yeah.
But listening to your breakdown, this is why you have to take the nuance and details. You really sold me on the long term. Not that the Knicks have a ton of flexibility, so that might be the right word, but optionality, I will say, that they have going forward if they do this, right? The sign and trade possibilities, the re-signing him and then moving the salary that next season, right? They're signing him and then realizing the season after, okay, we can just try to, cut some costs here. There's some options there, but it does also help you in the short term. And if you don't think Jericho Sims, is going to be part of the future, and you're not really sure about Tyler Kolek, although I think Kolek is a good player and I like Kolek, it is interesting. I always thought the salary they signed him to was interesting after the draft. I was like, well, do they really like him, or is this more about what we can do? You know what I'm saying? For future flexibility. Is it more of that? That was something I always thought about. But I think what I would say to the trades that you brought here, the three that you brought, even though they all involve Jericho Sims, I think you were really thinking about like, okay, what can we? How do the Knicks have flexibility to serve some needs now, but not totally kill themselves a year or two down the road in terms of roster construction and what they could do? Good job by you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The Knicks are first in points per game from their starting five. They're dead last when it comes to points off the bench. It's a bit of a sore spot there, and it's harder for them to be able to get the level of talent that they need. So any way they can do it, let's see.
We'll see. Where are you, Jeremy, on this whole minutes discussion around the Knicks, and how much do you think that impacts whether or not a deal goes down in a couple of weeks at the trade deadline?
As a whole, I'm honestly indifferent. I think that each side has value. I understand if the players are playing a bit too much. I also understand the philosophy behind the players you'd play instead are a little green. Not having Mitchell Robinson, it certainly hurts. The Knicks traded their depth for top-end talent, and that's exactly what they're getting. These are players who are playing an insane amount of minutes, but they've also been blessed with good health. May that continue, but that's going to also skew the numbers in terms of how many minutes they've played. I truly understand the philosophy of not playing them as many minutes and also of playing them the exact amount of minutes that they have. I think the front office knows that they need to add someone to get them to that number 8 player that they can trust in the playoffs. And that, of course, assuming health, will provide the Knicks with some level of respite between now and when the playoffs begin. So I don't know if it'll necessarily force the issue, but it would not hurt it. That's for sure.
I think that is fair. It's going to be really interesting to see what the Knicks do, if they can do anything. But I hope we helped the people. We tried to come up with some, gave you some trades that are out there. Jeremy came up with some of his own. There was some thought and nuance put into it. These are realistic trades that could happen. They do work within the new CBA. They do work within the aprons and the salary cap. These could happen. So some good thoughts. Let us know what you think about these trades. Jeremy, I appreciate you, man, for coming on with me. First time I had you on. We are going to do a trade deadline show in a couple of weeks. I'm going to have to try to book you for that because we may need your voice to talk about this. But we'll see if the Knicks make a deal, and we'll see how the Knicks progress through the rest of the season. Thank you, sir.
Dexter, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Okay, so the Knicks, they move on this week. They only have a couple games. The Knicks, we talked about their load, how much they played. They only get to play a couple of games this week. Nets on Tuesday night in Brooklyn, so don't have to travel far. Then they're back home for the Kings on Saturday, who will be in town. So Knicks getting a little bit of rest. We know about all the minutes and the minutes police talking about how much the starters have played, which there is a lot of truth and concern around that. But the Knicks do get a little bit of a break this week, and we'll see if they can take care of business against the Nets and the Kings. That's going to do it for this episode of New York Got Game. Special thanks to my guest, Jeremy Cohen of Knicks Film School. Go check him out there. Also, thank you to my editor, Antonio Oliveras Nicole, my production assistant, the great Jeff Stansbury. We'll be back next week with another edition of New York Got Game. And don't forget to check us out on the live show, Knicks Weekly Live, on Thursday with my guy, Brian Fonseca. We'll be back next week. Until then, peace.
And thanks for watching New York Got Game. Boom shakalaka.